So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Yes, we're talking about the New York Islanders again as we are taking a look at the Islanders goaltender prospect back from 2014, goaltender Ilya Sorokin. The crazy story of how he was going to come to the Islanders and decided not to, and all the stuff that has gone on with Sorokin, and he's never even been with the New York Islanders. So we're going to take a look at some of that in this video. If you like what we're doing here, Goal Line Hockey, want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. And let's take a look at the drama around Ilya Sorokin and the New York Islanders. So Ilya Sorokin, a former third-round pick back in 2014, 78th overall. He's 24 years old, and he has not yet played a single game with the New York Islanders. Hasn't signed pen to paper on his entry-level contract. He decided to stay in the KHL with his team in CSKA Moscow, and he's put up some solid numbers in the KHL. Since the 2014-2015 draft, when he was drafted by the New York Islanders, his numbers have been pretty impressive to say the least, and they've actually been pretty solid all the way through. Since the 2015-2016 season, a .953 save percentage, just absolutely ridiculous. And you look at the next season, a .929, a .931, a .940, a .935, and this season, now he only did play 4 games this year, in the playoffs. In his 4 games, a .966 save percentage in the postseason. So to say Ilya Sorokin is a pretty solid goaltender in probably the second best league in the world compared to the NHL, obviously being the first, obviously being the best league around. Pretty solid there for Ilya Sorokin, and a very solid goaltending prospect for the New York Islanders that they have just not been able to bring into the fold. And we're going to take a look at some of those reasons in this video. So the big thing back when he was drafted back in 2014, if you don't remember, the New York Islanders, for a long time and kind of since the past 2 or 3 years, they were not a relevant franchise. They weren't a destination for free agents. They were always rebuilding, and it just seemed like the New York Islanders were just kind of a bottom tier organization. They did draft John Tavares back in 2009, and since then, they have made some weird draft picks. They made some weird moves, and it never really felt like under Garth Snow the Islanders were truly a Stanley Cup contender. Now, obviously, those things changed. Since then, Lula, Morello, and Barry Trotz have come into the fold, and the Islanders are a much more respected organization, making the playoffs in the last 2 seasons and 3 times in the last 4 years. So we're going to take a look at why Ilya Sorokin did not want to go to the Islanders. Now, the big thing, like I just mentioned, the instability of the New York Islanders organization. You look at that defense, it was a lot of weird guys, and nothing against them, but you're talking about Mark Streit being the captain of the New York Islanders, who was a solid player, but he wasn't anything super crazy. Andrew McDonald, you had guys like Thomas Hickey who were pretty solid. You had Calvin DeHaan, who was a top 10 first-round pick back in the day in the 2009-2010 NHL draft, and he just never really developed into that superstar defenseman that the New York Islanders could have used. And the fact that the Islanders hadn't made the playoffs or won a playoff series in almost 20 years, Ilya Sorokin was really not all that attracted to leaving what he had in the KHL. He would have to take a salary cut because the entry-level contracts at the NHL are at max $925. Now, obviously, you have signing bonuses and things like that, which NHL general managers have definitely taken well advantage of, and I'm sure Sorokin will be doing that in his contract with the New York Islanders if he does indeed sign with them. But back at the time, he was making good money in the KHL. He was at home. He had a very solid team. CSKA Moscow is one of the more prestigious teams there in the KHL, so why would he leave a prestigious high-level team in the KHL to come to a unstable, probably not great situation for him, and let alone move across the pond, across to North America, where he probably doesn't know a ton of English. So there's just a ton of factors involved here with Ilya Sorokin, and why he didn't want to come to the New York Islanders. So there was talk in, I believe it was 2017 or 2018, where his contract was set to be over with his KHL team, and there was potential talk that he was looking at the New York Islanders to possibly come over to North America. Now, at that time, Garth Snow was still the general manager of the team, and the Islanders had just come off a season with Doug Weight as the head coach, and they gave up the most goals in an NHL, one of the most worst goals against in NHL history, and it really was an issue. And once again, not attractive for a goaltender who is going to be possibly giving up 3 or 4 goals every night. That's not really something that you want to put yourself into. So, obviously Garth Snow was in talks with Ilya Sorokin and his agent, and unfortunately for the Islanders, they were more of just a way of leverage for his KHL team to pretty much give him some more money, just to say he was at least interested in going to the New York Islanders. The KHL team, CSKA Moscow, was willing to give him a little bit more of a bump on his contract, and the Islanders were just leverage for Ilya Sorokin. And that hasn't happened since, right? Artemi Panarin? Man, I was going to buy an Islanders Panarin jersey, but obviously that didn't happen. So that's the thing. The Islanders were used as leverage, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out. So now we move another year or two later. The Islanders make the playoffs under Lula and Morello. Now Garth Snow, Doug Weight, they've all been fired, let go. You have Barry Trotz and Lula and Morello at the helm of the New York Islanders. And in that first season, what do we remember? The New York Islanders play the Pittsburgh Penguins. They sweep the Penguins. They go to the second round. They get beat by the Carolina Hurricanes, but the respect around the league for the New York Islanders had completely changed. They were a very solid defensive, structured team under Barry Trotz. The Islanders, Robin Lehner, who was basically let go to be on an abandoned island there by the Buffalo Sabres, ended up becoming a Vezina candidate, won the Bill Masterton Trophy as well as the William N. Jennings. He had a very solid comeback season with the New York Islanders, talked about his mental health and stuff at the NHL Awards. A really emotional situation there for Robin Lehner. And it looked like goaltenders were all of a sudden attracted to the New York Islanders. Not to mention that the Islanders made a couple of key additions to their goaltending coaching staff, led by who other than Lou Lamoriello, bringing in guys like Piero Greco, who he had dealt with the Washington Capitals, and making Braden Holtby the goaltender that he is today. So the Islanders obviously have a record with making goaltenders now with Robin Lehner and Semyon Varlamov, who is also friends with Ilya Sorokin. So the Islanders were willing to let go of Robin Lehner last offseason to bring in Semyon Varlamov as kind of a little bit of an incentive for Ilya Sorokin, his buddy there, a Russian guy, and Semyon Varlamov, who had a decent season with the New York Islanders this year. Could have definitely been better, but the Islanders now have another reason of leverage. Not to mention Thomas Grice's contract is set to conclude at the end of this season, so it seems like a perfect storm for the New York Islanders to have the Ilya Sorokin, Semyon Varlamov goaltending tandem as soon as next January. So now the rumors are starting to come out that Ilya Sorokin is indeed possibly looking to go to the New York Islanders. Last summer, we saw Ilya Sorokin's agent actually come to Northwell Health Ice Center, and he was supposedly talking with general manager Lou Lamoriello on just looking at the facilities, kind of seeing what the Islanders had done. They had recently just made huge upgrades to the practice facility there for the New York Islanders, pretty close to the arena. So it was interesting to see that this was pretty much like what we were going to see. We're going to see the Islanders pretty much, trying to make, incentives and create a solid environment for Ilya Sorokin's agent to bring back to Sorokin when he went back to Russia. So things kind of quieted down in the fall. Obviously, Ilya Sorokin played his KHL season this year, put up a .935 save percentage, a pretty solid season for Sorokin. And now all of a sudden we start to get into January, February, around the trade deadline, and Darren Dreger comes out with a tweet that the New York Islanders have traded Ilya Sorokin to the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, to most, including myself, most Islander fans were completely and utterly stunned. It seemed like the Islanders were finally, it looked like this summer was more of a waiting game for his KHL contract to end in March or April, and the Islanders could start working on a contract to bring in Ilya Sorokin for this fall. That was pretty much the plan up until the trade deadline. So for the Islanders to go out and trade Sorokin to the Chicago Blackhawks and to just make things even worse, the Blackhawks would have Robin Lehner and Ilya Sorokin, who most Islander fans, that would be the dream tandem. Now they're both in Chicago. That would have definitely been disappointing, but obviously the reports were false. Quickly it was noted that Sorokin did not get traded by the New York Islanders to the Chicago Blackhawks, but it definitely raised the suspicion. Why would that even be out there? Well, Darren Dreger supposedly talked to some Russian players that Sorokin had played with and asked them if he had got traded or something like that. I don't even know the complete story, but it ended up being false. Thank goodness for the New York Islanders and their fans, because I think Islander fans would have been pretty PO'd if that did indeed happen, including myself. So now the trade deadline comes. He's playing in the KHL playoffs. And you know the story. Right a couple weeks after the trade deadline, obviously the COVID-19 hits and everything changes. Everything. So the Islanders plan, once his KHL season comes to an end, they could talk to him and get him signed pretty much in March, April, May, even probably more likely May. In May, the Islanders could work out an agreement and have him signed for next season. And worst case, if he doesn't re-sign, the Islanders can trade him and decide to keep Thomas Greiss if that's really what they want to do. Well, then the virus hit, like I said, and changed everything. So now you're not allowed. The NHL is not allowing teams to extend contracts or create new contracts for next season at this point, as because the season is considering we still have the Stanley Cup playoffs for 2020, they don't want players to be coming to the NHL that are from Russia or anywhere else, even in the NHL. They don't want players being signed in free agency because there is still a season here, and they don't want that to be, they don't want them playing in this year's playoffs as they did not play in the regular season. So now that creates an even bigger issue for the New York Islanders because they can't sign Ilya Sorokin. His season in the KHL is over, but now that's another factor as well, because if the earliest, so obviously Sorokin cannot play in this play-in series with the New York Islanders because it is still part of the 2019-2020 season. So now it makes, it's going to be probably January, the end of December, the earliest that Ilya Sorokin plays professional hockey again. That's not going to work. Because remember, he hasn't been playing since February. February is the end of February, early March is the last time he's played, since the KHL canceled. The KHL canceled about 2 or 3 weeks earlier than the NHL. So he's already been not playing hockey for a couple of months. And now the earliest he could play if he signs in the NHL is December. And the fact that he can't sign a contract right now makes things even more complicated because he can't even get his life situated in the NHL on Long Island with the New York Islanders, as well as if he doesn't have a work visa, he has to get that done as well. So there's a lot more factors now with this virus that have completely derailed the New York Islanders' plan of, quietly and quickly bringing in Ilya Sorokin in a quick swoop. That will not be happening. So now Ilya Sorokin has to decide, is he willing to wait almost a year and play, like I said, almost a year without hockey? Or does he decide that he's going to go back to the KHL once again on maybe a 1-year contract? But again, that's one more year that the Islanders have to wait and figure out a situation with Sorokin. They have to figure out a goaltender to play with Semyon Varlamov this coming season if Sorokin doesn't come over. So there are plenty of factors here that definitely make things interesting, and I believe in Lula Morello that he will find a way to get this done. He was very confident that the Islanders would bring in Ilya Sorokin before this whole virus thing. They definitely put a huge curveball in Lula Morello's way, but I'm sure he'll find a way to get this done. This is a huge move for the New York Islanders. They have not had a stable, solid number one goaltender in a long time, and in today's NHL, having a solid goaltending tandem is hugely It's so important, especially once you get to the playoffs. If you have a hot goaltender, anything can happen. We've seen that in the past. Look what happened with Andrew Hammond back in the day with the Ottawa Senators. Look at the run he brought them back to the playoffs when it looked like they weren't even close. You've seen other stories where Tuukka Rask had a really solid run. Jordan Binnington came out of nowhere, won the Stanley Cup with the St. Louis Blues. So goaltending is essential in today's NHL, in hockey in general. If you don't have a good goaltender, you don't have a chance. Because if the other goaltender is even half as good, it's game over. There's no way. So that's just kind of how it goes. But the New York Islanders, it's going to be interesting what happens here with Ilya Sorokin. And leave in the comment section down below, what do you think will happen with Sorokin and the New York Islanders? What are your thoughts on this? Obviously, there are plenty of other KHL players that are having some of the same issues. Kirill Kaprizov, who wants to sign with the Minnesota Wild. The Minnesota Wild are having problems bringing him in to play with their team. And it's going to be interesting, too, because, to add to the storyline, the New York Islanders' rivals, the New York Rangers, have Igor Shesterkin, who played in the rival to CSKA Moscow, which is Ilya Sorokin's team in St. Petersburg. So it adds a little bit of a rivalry, and maybe I'll make a video about that this summer, talking about Igor Shesterkin versus Ilya Sorokin. It's going to be an interesting tandem, and it may add a little bit more fuel to the rivalry between the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers. So that's it for this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, you want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.